A common question leaders ask is, how do I motivate and engage my people? In this episode, I'm going to share some practical ways on how to motivate and engage your people. Welcome to Business Leaders Coach, where we educate, enable, equip, and empower you to become the best leader that you can be. My name is Toyo Shumbi, founder of Business Leaders Coach, where we work with CEOs and leadership teams, moving from startup to scale up. And on this podcast, I bring you practical steps, tips that you can apply in your leadership today. We draw wisdom from some of the best business books. We bring on guests, entrepreneurs, and authors as well. And you can go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast to subscribe, so we can send you episodes as they come out, and also some of the templates or tools that we might use in subsequent episodes. You could also watch this or listen to this on YouTube if you want, and also you can subscribe there as well. Today I am talking about how to motivate and engage your people. I remember a lot of times when I have traveled to different locations, different offices, where I've either delivered some training or coaching some of the leaders there. And typically what happens is somebody would see me and say, "Oh, Toy, can I just have a minute with you just to catch up on things? And I've got a few questions to ask," would normally be the way they would put it. And then they'll sit down and then they'll say, "Well, I've just got a question that I want to ask you. How do I motivate my people?" And it's a topic that gets asked a lot of times in bigger organizations with a lot of leaders or startup companies that are now hiring more people. How do we keep them motivated? Well, today we are going to look at 3 areas where this can happen, and in the 3 areas with some practical steps after. So we are going to sort of talk about, first of all, what is motivation. Then we're going to look at 2 main ways we are motivated, and then I'm going to give you 4 principles. Those are the 3 areas. So I'm going to try and make this practical so that you can actually apply this even today. So let's start first of all by having a clear definition of motivation. Most of the times when people are actually even asking this question, I want to motivate my people, I think, well, first of all, we've got to ask ourselves, what are we actually saying? You know, what does that actually mean? And if that's a question that you've asked yourself, what does that mean to you? What is it that you are trying to achieve by asking that question? Here's what I have discovered. 9 times out of 10, it's either one of these. It's I want to see people using their initiative. You know, that's mainly the reason why the leader is asking this question about how do I motivate my people. Another one could be, I want to see people hungry to do things. You know, I want to see them, you know, they're interested in it, they're engaged in it, they're doing it proactively. In a way, it's the same thing, isn't it? By using their initiative. But sometimes they use that word, I'm hungry, right? Or I want my people to be driven, or I want them to be ambitious, or I want them to be go-getters. Now, all these can be put under that idea of seeing motivation in action. But what does motivation mean? Now, the person who has done perhaps the most research on this topic of motivation is Edward Deci. Now, he's one of the most influential professors on this topic. He's the person that many authors quote. Daniel Pink, in his book Drive, quotes him. Susan Fowler, author of the book Why Motivating People Doesn't Work, she quotes him as well. Almost all good authors would have to go to Edward Deci to get the lowdown, because he's the one that spent most time researching this. And what he comes up with is quite profound, because it's so simple. You know, when you ask the question, what does motivation mean? Here's how he defines it. He simply defines it as being moved to do something. It's as simple as that. He defines motivation simply as being moved to do something. And this is a very simple definition. However, it does capture what we are expecting to see when we talk about the person that is self-motivated. They are moved to take action. So you think about what I said earlier on when people ask the question and then they say, I want to see people using their initiative. I want to see people hungry to do things. I want to see people driven, go-getters. Yes, I think that is right in terms of you can see this in action. But when you go back to that definition, being moved to do something, there's another side to it, which I laugh. And when I've done webinars on this topic, I've always had a good laugh, because what does that really mean, to be moved to do something? So you might think that it means, for instance, in sales, that people are picking up the phone or booking meetings with their clients, making calls, doing deals. Does it always mean that? Could it not also mean being moved to sit on the couch, being moved to watch more Netflix? You get my point? Like, everybody is motivated, and that's the interesting thing. When we talk about how do I motivate my people, what you will find is that at the end of the day, everybody is really motivated, because we're all doing something in that space of time. But I get what you mean. I don't want to go down that route, because what you're really saying is, how do I get them to do what I want them to do, isn't it? Most of the time when we have that conversation, that's normally what happens. Is like, okay, so what you really want them to do is you want them to do what you want them to do. Is that right? Well, yeah, something like that, Okay, so let's talk about that, and we're going to have to really understand how motivation works. So before I give you these 4 principles, I want to stress that these are not just my own personal ideas. This is from the research that I've said, and he has found that there are some consistent patterns that can be observed when we study a person that is motivated for the right reasons. Okay, so they found that there are actually 2 major types of motivation. One is called controlled motivation, and the second is autonomous motivation. So the thing is that with this first type of motivation, which is the controlled motivation, it is achieved by seduction, or by being coerced, or by being put under pressure. And what Deci found is that when people are motivated in this way, it doesn't really go that well. You get it? Now, when people are motivated autonomously, we can see that the outputs is that they act based on volition and choice. They endorse the activity, and they actually are engaged in what they are doing. They are interested in the activity, and they feel a sense of deep value. So I think it's interesting, first of all, to ask ourselves, how have you been motivating your people? Is it through seduction, or being pressurizing people, or manipulating people? And in some cases, and this is the part where it does get a bit controversial, because especially in sales, incentives and things like that, they do play a part in motivating people. But you've got to really ask yourself, how often do you have to keep regurgitating an incentive in order to get people to move? So are they really moving for the right reasons, and are they choosing to move on their own? If you didn't actually dangle that carrot, would they move? And that's a deeper thing to really reflect on, because I think you can get people motivated to start things, but to maintain, there's got to be a higher purpose. So in the same way that we can say that everyone has a choice, this is going to have to be your choice. If you wish to create an autonomous culture that leads to genuine motivation, or you can choose the other, which is to create a controlled motivation culture that leads to the short-term results, but could potentially have long-term negative consequences. And what they found is that when people were motivated through this control, he said you saw movement, but the person usually eventually thought about the shortest way to get the results. Now, there is a story that illustrates this perfectly, because when a company focuses too much on the wrong thing, you can get the wrong results. And this is where the term the Cobra Effect comes in. And let me just give you insight into this. Maybe you've heard of this before, but the Cobra Effect describes unintended negative consequences when a reward or incentive is offered to solve a problem. The story goes that many years ago in colonial India, there was a cobra infestation in the city of Delhi. So the British created a bounty for cobra skins. They thought by offering a reward for dead cobras, the public will solve the snake overpopulation problem. But instead of capturing these feral cobras and killing them, people started farming cobras for their skins. That's interesting, isn't it? So the British eventually got wise to the cobra farming industry and cancelled the bounty. But with no bounties to collect, the cobra farmers set the snakes free into the city, making their infestation even worse than before. It's from this that we have the term the Cobra Effect. And I remember long ago when I used to work for a company, and the target was to get rid of a particular business machine, to which we were giving it away for free for a certain number of days for them to use it. And then the whole idea was that if they maybe start to use it, maybe they fall in love with it, and then they end up buying it, or they end up going on some kind of subscription fee for it. And so the whole idea was just get as many out there, right? And we would have a great month where people would get a lot of them out there. The numbers are high, but in about a month or two later, a lot of these machines came coming back, And so when people are motivated autonomously, when the idea is that this is what I'm doing, I'm engaged in this, I'm not just doing it to get an instant result, because that's the problem that we had, was that we were just looking at things that month, and that's what happened, right? And so you see that when we are motivated for the wrong reason, for the short-term gain, it doesn't actually lead to long-term success. When people are motivated autonomously, we find that they end up being more creative, they end up problem solving, their performance increases, they have more positive emotions, and they end up with better psychological and physical wellness. And so today we're going to share with you 4 simple principles that are key to motivation and engagement. And I don't want this to be theory, and so I really want this to be practical, so that it's something that you can actually apply even today, because as people leaders, it's vital that you begin to appreciate the scientific evidence and the research on these topics. And I would encourage you to start looking at this, because if this is an issue, then you've also got to understand that there's now a lot of science that has helped us to understand how we operate as people. And as I tell anybody that I coach or train, become a behavioral scientist, because it's going to help you lead your people more effectively. Okay, so the 4 principles are something that I call P.R.E.P. P.R.E.P. The P stands for purpose, and that we need to engage our people, connecting our people with something meaningful. The second is R, which is for responsibility, and who owns the responsibility. The message to all your people is that the responsibility is yours. E is for engage, to empower, and that's what you can help do with your team members. And the P, the final P, is personally develop yourself. You need to have a development plan. So let's quickly go through that and then give you some practical tips of how you can engage with this P.R.E.P acronym. So first of all, we start with purpose. So what is purpose? A simple formula is that purpose can equal to your contribution plus your passion. Now, I hope that as an organization, you have a purpose statement that articulates what you are all about. And so it's really important now for a company to have a clear purpose. You know, one of the ways to help your people get motivated then is to ask questions that helps them connect them with your purpose. I was delivering some training to a group of directors just 2 weeks ago, and we spent a lot of time just really connecting the dots, because sometimes you can have the purpose statement, it's on your slides, it's on your website, and people don't really talk about it. And this is something that I think it needs to change, which is that the conversation around your purpose should be almost a daily, weekly conversation. And it's your responsibility to help your team members connect with this purpose. And I'm going to give you some specific things that you can do. So you have to specifically ask them. I'm going to give you the questions that you can ask. You might want to write this down, right? And you're going to help them. These questions are going to help them connect their day-to-day work that contributes to the bigger picture of the organization. And this might challenge you because sometimes, right, I have worked with and I've been, or I've seen at least, companies that have a purpose of being the best, being number one, and or being the most profitable. And unfortunately, it doesn't help. I did record a podcast, episode 25, The Infinite Game, 5 Questions to Craft Your Vision. And in that podcast, I share from Simon Sinek's book about the interesting insights around purpose and vision and how you need to be able to articulate that in the right way. Is it for a noble cause, and is it for an infinite game? And so if your purpose statement is not engaging, if it's not, at the end of the day, it has to be for the purpose of good, and it has to articulate that. Then you haven't yet still got a purpose, and that could be your problem of why you are finding it hard to motivate and engage your people. But if you do have a good purpose, then these questions will help, right? Number one, so you want to ask questions in these 2 categories. The first is around their contribution, right? And you might even want to do this first with yourself to see how you are engaged with the purpose. The first question is, in what ways do you identify with the organization's purpose? Again, this is a question that I've seen senior leaders within the business who haven't really even thought about that question, even though perhaps they came up with the purpose themselves. And it's fine. You know, we've seen many of this happen. Hopefully it's going to change down the line, because I think this is a conversation that many organizations are realizing that it has to be important, and we do have more startups that are starting off with a clear purpose. But in what ways do you identify with the organization's purpose? Second question, how does your job contribute towards this purpose? Right, and that could be anybody. It could be the sweeper, it could be the cleaner, it could be, I mean, at the end of the day, the whole idea is that we're all on this together. We're all trying to achieve something. And so if your purpose is something that is out there to really do good, then you can connect with it. And a lot of times people they need an example of what a purpose statement might sound like. And so I'm just going to give you a few. Remember that when you're answering the question, what is our purpose? The question really is, why do we exist? Okay, so I'm going to give you a few examples of companies that have really thought this through, as you can use as a template. And then we'll go back to those questions, okay, so that you can sort of get an idea of how anybody in the company can still answer these questions. So for instance, in Disney, their purpose statement is to entertain, inform, and inspire people around the globe, right? Microsoft, to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. While Google is to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful, while Nike is to do everything possible to expand human potential. Now, with just a few of those examples, let's go back to those questions. So if you sit down with anybody in the organization and then you say, in what ways do you identify with the organization's purpose? I mean, that's just a huge question that everybody in that the secretary, I'm trying to just choose jobs that sometimes we might say they're on the fringes. Why should they be engaged with the purpose? No, they should. If the purpose statement is inspiring, you get it. How does your job contribute towards this purpose? Think about Disney, to entertain, inform, and inspire people around the globe. Think about Nike, to do everything possible to expand human potential. The salesperson selling the products to the customer is playing a role in that purpose. And then the third question is, in what ways does your daily activity contribute to this overall purpose? Can you see? So you're trying to connect the dots. How does your daily activity, whether it's filing, whether it's following up with certain people, whether it is selling, whether it is managing the team, whatever it is, you are contributing to the purpose. But it's by asking the question that normally people will be engaged with thinking that way. Okay, let's move forward. The second area is passion. So I said that purpose would equals your contribution plus your passion. And I am spending more time on this one because at the end of the day, this is where the motivation should really begin. So your passion. So what do we mean by that? It's by asking these three questions. What do you love doing in your job? Think of a time you are most passionate about your work. What was happening? And the third question is, what gets you most energized about your work? Now, we're going to come back to that same kind of question when it comes to engagement. But first of all, by whoever it is, by the time they answer these questions, that's giving you insight into what is driving them. Remember, it's their passion. Remember that motivation is by being moved, and we are moved by our passion. Things that we're passionate about, we are normally moved. So just by you actually spending time asking your direct reports these questions and getting your direct reports to do that with their teams can really help people become more aware. So this is something that you should first do for yourself, and then you can do it with your team members. The second principle is the importance of being responsible, because as you said that you want to see your people take initiative, and that's something that you have to make clear, that the responsibility is yours. It is your responsibility to move, and this is what actually creates that autonomous motivation. And sometimes you have to make it clear that you are the one to use your own initiative. Now, you can only help to initiate or introduce someone to being motivated. You get that? Let me just say that again. You can only help to initiate or introduce someone to being motivated. Each person has to come to that awareness that they are responsible for their own motivation eventually. But you can help bring them to that awareness, and you can create an environment that helps a person to be motivated. So those are the things that you can do, because the moment you cross the line, then it turns into the seduction or coerciveness or manipulation. So how can you do this? Well, a simple way of doing it is to simply ask some questions again and ask people to rate themselves, and one of the simple questions could be, how would you rate yourself on this statement on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being absolutely, 1 being not at all? The statement is, I am responsible for my own choices. And just want to have that conversation with somebody and say, look, we're going through this whole process. Just want to really make sure that everybody feels empowered. I want to just get your own insight, because this is a mindset question, isn't it? I am responsible for my own choices. I mean, if I give it a 5, that means I'm taking full responsibility for my choices. If I give it anything less than that, it leads to a conversation. And so whatever I give myself, you can say, why did I give myself that score? So the next question you can ask is, why did you give yourself that score? It doesn't matter what score, isn't it? If I gave it a 1, I have a reason. And I can say, well, my hands are tied. The decision's already been made. And that's a conversation to have, right? If I give it a 5, then that's fine. Then at least you now are clear that I am the one responsibility for my own choices. Third question is, what day-to-day activities are you responsible for? And this is the question that I think that you would need to really pay attention to, because I think that in many organizations today, things are so complicated, there's so much noise, that people are actually not aware of what they are responsible for. And this is the reason why creating checklists, bullet points, things like that, just to simplify, these are the things that you're responsible for. And you might be surprised what might come out of that. So this is something that you might want to do. Again, sometimes this might be an overlooked question. The question is, what is required of me? It's not always known, especially in this current climate, right? What is required of me? Okay, so that's the second area. So we've looked at purpose, talked now about responsibility. Number 3 is engage to empower. Okay, engage to empower. Managers do play a huge role when it comes to engagement. As the saying goes, people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. Man, I think there's truth to that from my own experience. But at the end of the day, since we're talking about responsibility, it is still the responsibility of the individual. But this is where you do play a role. And so if we are going to help our team members, we might need to first establish where they currently are. And that's another conversation you might want to have in terms of their engagement level. There are different tools that you can use. Obviously, a lot of companies would use an ENPS score, but that doesn't always boil down to the individual. So that might still be a conversation to ask the individual, where do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 5? How engaged are you? And that could be a good way of having the conversation. But rather than also focusing on that, you also want to observe. And I think you want to go back to those questions on the passion, which is just about what is it that they are passionate in doing. Because one of the things that is always true is that we find engagement, or we are motivated when we are doing the things that we love to do. So one of the best ways to engage people in their job, apart from linking it to purpose, is to find out what their strengths are, right? What they enjoy doing, and see how often you can get them to do it, because that's how you can engage and empower them. Taking strength finders might be a good idea, and then sitting down and talking about their strengths. So you can go to Gallup or buy the book Strength Finders and get your team members to do the assessment, come up with their results. They'll normally end up with 5 top strengths, and then the two of you can have a healthy discussion about how they can utilize that in the job role, where they find themselves engaged. And that will be a good way of engaging your team member, making sure that they're doing certain things that they love. Now, with many jobs, that's not the case. You're not always going to be doing the things that you enjoy doing, but the more you know what gives them energy, the more you can put them in that place. That's where you play the role of empowering them to do that. The person that loves detailed work, you give them that. The person that loves more abstract work, you give them that, and you make sure that they're engaged. So that's the third area. The last one in our P.R.E.P acronym is personally develop yourself. The research on motivation shows that when people are intentionally mastering a skill, they're naturally motivated. So obviously, there will be frustrating moments when the person is discouraged because you're learning something new, but the choice to master something creates motivation within the person. So the question that you perhaps need to ask yourself and your team members is, what are you mastering right now? And that's one area where developing our skills is something that we constantly need to be doing. I think we all constantly need to be learning to keep ourselves moving forward, especially in today's digital age. Within our organizations, people do need to keep on learning. Now, what I have found, once you do have an organization and team members, I've discovered 6 type of development plans that can be tailored to the person, that you can help them to create a development plan. Okay, so let me go through it, and I might do another podcast on this one in particular. So if you think about your team members, there's 6 things that typically should somehow at some point be part of their development plan. Number 1 is transition, which is that a person can be transitioning from one type of job into another. And I've seen this happen in different organizations. People move from sales to the IT department. People move from sales into HR. People move from HR into IT, and that's transitioning from a completely different skill set to another. And that's valid, but helping your individual to have a plan where they're mastering these new skill sets is engaging. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is own job. Okay, so on the current job that they're in, there's levels that they can master. So a team leader, for instance, can master the skills of empowering or delegating. And obviously when they started the role, they weren't proficient in that, and that's something that they can master how to keep on doing it better. You get it? So within that job, there will be competencies that you're trying to increase your skill sets in. And that's the second area. And that you can develop a plan on that. The third is promotional. Now, promotional plan is where you are moving from one level to the next. So earlier on, I just talked about a team leader. And if you're a team leader and you're now going to transition into becoming a leader of team leaders, you see, that's a promotion. And so what skill sets do you need to start putting into practice or learning? And that's a plan that you can have, and your manager hopefully should be helping you to develop those skill sets and giving you opportunities, perhaps to lead the meeting, occasionally, different things like that. So there's that whole transition, and that will lead to your promotion into that next level of the job. Then we have the improvement plan. Now, the improvement plan, sometimes it's called the P.R.E.P, performance improvement plan. It's different from the own job plan because, to be more specific, the improvement plan means that there's been an assessment where you are below in some of the things that was expected of you. And so we want to bring them back up to at least standard. And that's the improvement plan. So you could be in a specific area where maybe through a 360 feedback, you got some low scores, or there were some things that you just weren't able to do that we thought you could do. And so it's now bringing you up to that level of standards. That's the improvement plan. And then you have the career plan. And this could be the long-term plan of where you are now and where you want to be in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And it's great if you have that kind of conversation and with your manager, or you have the conversation with your team members, so that you can begin to get them to build relationships. I've seen this happen also in different organizations where people have shared that I want to be here now, and then in the next X years, I want to also be doing this. And so you can already start to get them to start thinking, doing courses and things like that to build up their skill sets in that direction. And that's a longer term plan with the career. And the final one is succession. The succession is normally an agreed plan with, either say it's you and you're looking for somebody to succeed you. Obviously, that's a plan that you and that person needs to have in terms of the things that they're taking over while you are perhaps exiting or you're moving to your own next level. So those are 6 types of plans that you can actually have that can help your person have a personal development plan. The 6 areas, they actually stand for topics. So that's transition, own job, promotional, improvement, career, and succession. And as I said, perhaps that's another podcast that I'll do at some point, and I'll go into more detail around how we can execute on that. So the question is, what are your team members mastering right now? And what are you also mastering right now? Because that's going to lead to them being motivated. So one thing that is certain is that moving forward, you and your team need to encourage a learning culture. And that is encouraging each person to become self-learners. You've heard me talk about this before. I think that after this whole pandemic and the way the world is going to suit the person that is already a self-learner, and therefore having a development plan is essential for both you and your team members. So there you have it, how to motivate and engage your people. Use P.R.E.P. Engage your people with their purpose. So you want to connect people with the purpose. You want to encourage people to take responsibility. You want to engage and empower the person, and you also want to help them have a personal development plan. Okay, so thank you for listening. Again, you can go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast, and you can also subscribe if you're watching or listening to this on YouTube. In addition to that, you want to check out other podcasts episodes that I've done. If you haven't listened to them, you can listen to the previous one, which is how to build your leadership pipeline, how to use situational leadership, why creating a learning organization is the best way to grow, and the 5 great leadership books that I read in 2021. Go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast. Please subscribe as well and share this with your friends. If you are listening to this on Apple, please rate and give a review. It will help more people find the show. For now, this is Toyo Shimbi for Business Leaders Coach, signing off. Thank you.